Okay, welcome back to another episode of Hand Tool Rescue. Today we have a very interesting tool, and I know I might say that often, but this one is for my personal collection because it is so old, so unique, and was invented by none other than Mr. Starrett himself of the famous Starrett tools currently in business. This was one of his first ever patented tools, and this was patented in 1865. So I'm not entirely sure how long the production of these went. Most of them were either made by him personally in a foundry, or the Athol company, very close to where the current Starrett factory is located. So it's a really neat piece of history to have in my possession, and I'm just going to kind of treat it with as much respect as I can. And by that I mean I'm not going to remove massive amounts of history here. The wood parts are, in my opinion, pretty much irreplaceable. So I need to just salvage those and make sure no further damage continues or degradation. And the castings just need a general derusting and cleaning. There are multiple photos on the internet of a number of different styles and slight changes between each model or era that these were made, and it's kind of hard to pin down exactly what this specific one looked like with full paint and whatever. There are ones that have gears where this one doesn't. There are ones where the flywheels are spoked differently. There are ones where the walking beam section, which was taken apart earlier, is solid instead of this kind of ribbed I-beam looking construction here. So there's just a lot of changes over time. There isn't a type study on these, so I'm not exactly sure what era these are. Maybe this one is one of the earlier ones because it doesn't contain a lot of the modifications from potentially the later ones. I'm not sure, but I will provide a link in the description on kind of all the different photos I've found of different styles. The only confirmation that I have is one that looks fairly similar to the one I have here, and that's from an ad in the late 1800s, just a print ad, but it's just in black and white, so no idea on the color. There's also a painting from 1867, I believe, that contains one of these in the background, and it is black in this case, or at least bare steel. So I'm kind of going off that. I'm also going to be dunking all of the parts in Evaporust without applying any paint stripper to them whatsoever. The Evaporust, for some magical reason, brightens up any paint, old paint, and I can then see what the original colors were and where they were. This has helped me before with pinstriping on the check canceller, and hopefully it will help me again kind of locate and identify what paint and where it is supposed to be. So back to the disassembly here. A lot of parts came out easily because I've been kind of spritzing this with penetrating oil over the course of the last year or so that I've found this. But some parts are still just going to need heat. They're just incredibly seized. Who knows why? I guess penetrating oil doesn't penetrate that much. There's also a wooden base here that I'm going to try to preserve because the wood itself is definitely very old. Reviving wood to make it look like new is very difficult due to the staining that accumulates over time with the contact between the metal and the actual wood itself. So there's not much you can do for that. You can bleach wood if you really wanted to bring this back to a consistent color. You can bleach the wood aggressively, and that will remove all the tannins as well. So it'll be very pale wood, but with the right type of stain or oil, you can make it look almost like new without removing any material such as planing or sanding. But in this case, the base was just a really soft like pine or spruce, and these parts internally in the bucket were beech. Beech is very common wood used in this era. A lot of, and almost all of, transitional or wooden hand planes were made of beech wood during this time. You can see a little bit of that pinstriping there. I know it's there. I know it's trying to hide. And the actual bucket here is probably, I would say, not really replaceable. But it needs to be because it's in such poor condition. But I'm just going to salvage it as best as I can. The wooden disc at the bottom is also incredibly cool. I just love the kind of radial pattern that is shown from the cutting marks over 150 years of use. These classic pins that are in too many things. I hate these things. I can never drill them out properly. I'm always off by like, half a millimeter, and it ruins everything. I could put them on the mill, but this is a nightmare to clamp down because it's just still all together. If it was not, then it would have been easy. I could have welded something just right to the tip of the pin and then kind of like a slide hammer action to take it off. That would have probably been a better option than coughing to death over the fumes of penetrating oil. But it's fine. You can see the screw on the other side kind of keys it in anyways. The other side key was just there for reinforcement, I guess. And same with this one. At least this one I drilled a little better. I've heard about drill presses. I've heard that they can actually drill instead of like just wire wheels, so I may do that in the future. There we all parted out, and into the evaporust it goes. I need all that rust gone. I need to see the secrets that lie beneath, because I know it's there. And it's also just kind of I guess a good practice in case you do want to preserve some parts of a tool. It's also fantastic for hand planes at removing those little tiny dots of paint on every single hand plane in existence. I thought this bucket would just like deteriorate into nothing. I'm glad to see that it still exists. So now we can see the pinstriping and the paint. There's obviously a nice gold line in the middle of this part, and oddly, there's blue paint. I don't know why. I don't know what this is, because there's red paint everywhere else on the external parts that you actually see, but internally, it's blue and like this kind of purpley that probably just mixed with the red that was painted over it, and all the other castings have nothing. So I don't understand what the blue is. Like maybe, was it glue? Like there's no blue glue that exists. So if anyone has any ideas, I'd love to hear them. Why just the rim, the internal rim, is painted blue and nothing else. It makes no sense. I couldn't find any remnants of photos of one that was ever blue. It just really makes no sense. This handle also may or may not be original. I couldn't find a photo of that exact style handle in anything online. Air compressor is working fantastically, and it provides a wonderful surface for me to paint my usual selection of self-etching primer and a nice deeper red, not the kind of Ferrari red you've seen me use before, but more of a, I guess the can says colonial red, as they say. Here I'm actually using the Bridgeport like a normal human being, and drilling out every single possible hole for bushings. They all need it. I understand this isn't like a high speed or high load machine, but it's just so loose that it's ridiculous. It must have just been used like crazy, and that shows in the pattern in that wood that you'll see later. This thing has been used heavily, heavily. So it's nice to give some new life into it with some proper bronze bushings. I'll do my usual trick of throwing in the castings at the evaporist to darken them up, and I just like that look. It looks less like a gray and more of like a nice steel color that I really enjoy. Once you've sexually pleased the drill press, you can apply stain. This is the first coat where I forgot to shake the stain or stir it because I'm not a smart man, and then the second coat after I stirred it. I just left that on, and then I was just going to wipe it off like a smart person, but I am not a smart person. I don't know what I thought would happen. I don't know what has become of my mind. What I meant to do was this, which is just remove the excess and let the stain absorb into the wood and the cloth as necessary, and leave it in this old antique look because I am not going to touch the bottom of the bucket piece of wood very much other than a light cleaning, because I need to preserve that pattern. It's one of the coolest things I've ever seen a tool produce. It's almost like a rose engine in terms of this pattern. This is that safe erase that Evaporist sent me. I'm still testing it out to give my verdict on if it's amazing or not amazing or better than other things. What was really impressive, though, was that I applied that coating of the paint stripper and totally forgot about it until the next morning, and it wasn't even dry. It was still wet, which is actually awesome, because the biggest issue I have with most paint strippers is that it dries out pretty quickly, because the super chemically stuff is very volatile and it just starts evaporating. So, kind of good on that respect. Otherwise, it just seems like a paint stripper. I'm going to pin all the holes with this dowel. They're all worn out. They're way larger than they need to be, and they're all kind of rotten also. So I'll just drill into that new fresh wood, and it'll all be underneath and hidden, and literally you will never be able to notice such improvements as what I have done. Here's the bottom of the bucket. I'm going very lightly with 320 grit. I'm just removing any excess dirt, really, and then I hit it with mineral oil because this needs to kind of be a food safe area. Not that it wouldn't be with any other coating, really. I'll just let that soak in while I fancily paint it on. And there's that pattern. It's just super cool. I want it. I need it. all the holes in the tub itself, I decided to just braze since it's so much, I don't know, it's just more exciting than soldering, I guess. This is just a bronze filler rod with flux on the outside. And I'm just going one by one through all the little pinholes and larger holes and filling them up with as much bronze as I can. And then I'll go and sand them off after, nice and flush. It's just good to have it flowing into where it needs to. And then I'll repair the actual original solder that was used, probably just pure lead, as always, because this was not firmly attached. It somehow snapped off. So just letting that reflow into place is enough. Then I spent a while sanding and hammering out any major dents. You know, what can I do? I could have remade this very easily, but it's just, I find that offensive for something this aggressively old, and so at least interesting historically. Any other tool I might have done that. I'm just showing you how these bronze bushings work. Look at that. Look at all the pores. The oil just squeezes out. So they're already primed anyways. I don't need to do that with the bushings. They're already oil filled, but it's just to show you how that works when you drop oil in. It's like a sponge. So the drilling went really well with the castings, and I didn't oversize the holes. I was really worried about that. The things pressed in nicely, and they didn't move around like crazy. It was actually a nice experience. Who knew? I'm using Danish oil like I usually do. I don't know, I just like it. It's more oily than polyurethane, but less oily and more protective than boiled linseed oil. So it's kind of like a nice balance, which really is what it is. It's just a mix of the two. Here I did some pinstriping by hand because I'm a garbage human. I wasn't entirely pleased with the way that turned out. I thought that would be better, but I really need a proper pinstriping brush, and I'm going to try to look and invest into that because I feel like that would be something that'd be fun to practice. Not like the crazy, motorcycle pinstriping, but for, antique tools. Here is the glorious red bottom. Hopefully I matched it close. You'll just never know, but when you do take it out of the evaporus is the closest to kind of the original color that I'll be able to get, because once it dries into like a weird pale, like you almost don't even notice any of the pigment anymore. So I'm hoping this is the correct color. There were some other indications online of ones that have apparently been used very lightly, and they do have a red bottom to the bucket. But there's also ones that are completely barren. I think there was a black one. There's just some weirdness going on. These 3 screws are what the bucket rides on. These support the entire weight of the bucket, and they spin, and the bucket spins on these 3 screws instead of on the wood itself or some other mechanism that they could have put in there. Super inexpensive design. But I guess it works. Like, these aren't worn out or anything, and the casting's fine. So if it works, then don't worry about it. You can see kind of the dowels on the other side, what they look like. These will obviously be hidden by more washers as well, so it's not the end of the world. This is the part of the casting that does ride on those 3 screws. So I'm just going to remove the paint. I forgot to hit that with a little coat of wax, so it'd come off a little easier, but it's fine. I'll oil that later. So we're finally getting back to the main casting assembly, and this is very exciting to see if everything kind of lines up between the two, and I'm not getting any rubbing, and everything's moving smoothly. It's kind of high stress scenario at this point, because if I messed it up, what am I really going to do to fix it? It would be a lot of work. And you can see the castings now after the Danish oil and the evaporous soak. They're darker. They're not that light gray. They're like that dark steel metallic gray that I find somewhat sensual for some reason. Maybe it's just me. So every little step of the way, I'm kind of checking if it's broken or not. Checking if everything's moving, checking if I'm going to break something. What I did just show you there was that I actually ended up applying bronze brazing to the insides of those two pieces because I didn't have the bushing that would fit properly. So interestingly enough, I just let a bunch of brazing flow in between the two and then just drilled it out really lightly. And it seems fine. I guess that's better than the original casting that was there, which was ridiculously worn. And I could have just, like a crankshaft and a piston, I could have just sanded down one of the two sides and then clamped it back together and it would have been fine. But then only a minute part of the casting would be touching that shaft and it wouldn't be as exciting, let's say. So everything's still moving smoothly. Yay for me. I was worried I'd jam something and just break it all and then cry in the corner like I usually do with every restoration. The angle on that one, beauty. So it was also important actually to line up these holes. The castings have a little bit of play that you can mess with, like and flex. You can kind of see it here when I do the last screw. They just move just a little bit to line them up, but the alignment's important because a little off, and you got things rubbing where they shouldn't be rubbing, and that could be illegal. Also, for those paying attention, the screws that I used here didn't exist when I took them apart. So I used the ones from the side for the top. So I will have to find a solution for those screws since they were missing. So the blade, I just like testing hardness of things because I'm a weirdo. But somewhere between 55 and 60. So definitely a totally decent blade edge that can be obtained on this. And I just go up through the grits until it's reasonably sharp. It doesn't need to cut my hair, but I figured if it could cut paper pretty easily, then we're probably fine when it goes to cut lettuce or whatever. These I don't tighten all the way because there's two screws that go on the top that set the depth of the blade or even the angle if you really wanted. And that's just in terms of what kind of chop you want. So you can almost mash if you need to. Here's my solution for the missing screws. You gotta use brass, come on. So I have these from a previous restoration. I'm not exactly sure. It might be that antique tool chest that I did 2 years ago, but I'm using them as I can. That was my solution. You can also see the extra bronze bushing on the chopper that I added, just because. At first I was worried this wasn't lining up. It didn't make sense. Like maybe I got the bucket in the wrong position, but once in place it was completely fine. And these pins that I'm putting in, the first one and here's the second one, are completely meant to be entirely removable so you can get the bucket out. There's no other way after you're done chopping to get the bucket out than to remove these pins, flip that walking beam part up, and lift the bucket straight out. Because cleaning this, even with the bucket removed, is a nightmare. I don't even understand how you properly clean this, honestly. It literally makes no sense, especially if you're cutting meat, which this was used for, apparently. It's just, I guess that's why, once again, they only lived a certain age, much lower than what we do now. This is the arm that initiates the actual turning of the bucket with every turn of the handle, because the bucket just doesn't stay in place. It needs to spin so that you can evenly chop whatever you're chopping. I'm going to remake the feet. The originals, I believe, were out of wood. That would honestly make the most sense. But I have some steel lying around, and I think it would be kind of cool to add that design element and the extra weight, how little it may be. This thing still, even after I use it, it feels like it needs, like this base should have been either solidly cast or way heavier wood than pine, because it still moves around too much. I almost want to clamp it down and use. This is my entirely advanced pinstriping technique. Super secret. No one knows about it. I'm going to just oil the gears up because why not? Because I can. And then oil up everything else. All the little holes. They all need it. They all want it. They all want it. And that's pretty much it. We're going to throw in a half head of iceberg that I cut on the bandsaw and get to chopping. You set the blade depth appropriately, and the bucket will spin very slowly in place, and everything's just kind of chopping as you need to. This would be used for chopping lettuce, obviously, cabbage, for sauerkraut. Salisbury steak at the time was very popular, and that's apparently another use for this that was more common. And it does a fine dice. Even with the first round, like obviously if I just kept going, it would just get finer and finer. But for, what I'm doing here, you could have thrown that in a taco or something. It's not too shabby. It works completely well for 150 years old. It's fantastic. I had a lot of fun with this one. This one I am going to keep. No one can touch it. I will look at it and appreciate it and crank it every once in a while. And in order to clean this, I threw it back into the evaporust because I didn't want it to rust from the lettuce water. Anyways, thank you all for joining me once again, and I'll see you in the next one.